Om Namo Narayanaya. Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Shri Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram. Om Satchidananda Rupaya Vishvotpatyadihetave Tapatraya Vinashaya Shri Krishnaya Vayam Numaha. Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Harihi Om. Suprabhatam. We all are studying a text composed by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi Ji. After giving all the indications for the seeker how to do a right enquiry to reach to the supreme goal of human existence. What is that? That is self-realization. The supreme goal of every human being is one and one alone. That is to know our true nature, to abide in our own true nature. And that's the supreme goal of human existence. Today we are going to study this beautiful verse where Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi Ji is explaining that where he reached and he was reveling in the bliss of the self. Let us chant the verses first 24 and 25, and then we'll start the verse that is today. We are going to see verse number 26, 27. Verse number 24. Ish jivayo veshadhibhida satsvabhavato vastu kevalam. Difference which is seen between the Jiva and Ishvara is just because of conditioning. Once the conditioning is removed, then there is Vastu Kevalam. There is one and one alone. What is that? That is called as, from the standpoint of the Swabhava of the self, that is called as absolute reality. There is no otherness anywhere. So it is one and one alone. Then it is said, how is it possible? Veshahanata, Veshahanata, Svatmadarshanam, Ishadarshanam, Svatmarupataha. Veshahanata, one who is now growing above this conditioning of the upadhi, which is called as instrument. Then what is happening to that seeker? Sva Atma Darshanam. That person reaches to the state of self-realization. Isha Darshanam Svatma Rupataha. That state of realization itself is called as the vision of the Lord, and that is nothing other than the self-realization. So, what is this self-realization? This Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi Ji is taking up today for all of us to understand and just be. Just be. Verse number 26. Atma samstiti svatma darshanam, Atma samstiti svatma darshanam, Atma nirdvayat atmanishtata, Atma nirdvayat atmanishtata. There are 4 important words in this verse, and we all must very carefully listen for today's beautiful indication or the message of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi Ji, and be very clear about what is self-realization. Henceforth, there should not be any doubt about what is self-realization. So he says, Atma samstitihi. Atma samstitihi. Now I am just splitting these words. Atma samyak stitihi. So these are the 2 words. One is sthiti. This word we have to understand. I am going to explain one word now. Sthitihi, that we understand as a state. Example, waking state, dream state and a deep sleep state. That what we understand as a state. Why is it so? Because every state starts at one point and culminates at another point. So it has a starting point and it has an end point. That is called as a state. Now this state, what Ramana Maharshi Ji is telling, one has to understand, it is appearing as a state. That means for the explanation we have to use this word which is called as sthitihi. But which sthitihi? Samyak sthitihi. Samyak sthiti means very well established. Samyak sthiti means very well established. So, establish in what? In the self, Atma Tattva. So, in the Vedantic language, we will say the firm abidance in the self. Atma samstitihi. That means what is called as this firm abidance of the self? Then the word comes Svatma Darshanam. When a seeker abides in one's own self, that means Sva Atma Darshanam. That means the vision of the self. The vision of the self. So one who has now realize the self, how is that self? How is that self? You have to be careful about what questions I am asking about. One. How is that self? The next point is Atma Nirdvayat. That means that Atma Tattva which is Nirdvayaha. What is called as Nirdvayaha? Where there are no two. Where there is one, which is called as Advayaha. Which is called as Advayaha. Dvaya means two. Advaya means one alone. No two. So there are no two things here. There is only one and one. How is it possible that this mind is now resting in one and one alone? It is because of Atmanishtata. It is because of the Atmanishtata. What is called as Nishtha? It is that sort of connection. It is that sort of correction where there is no disconnection possible henceforth. Where there is no disconnection possible henceforth. Let me give this example. Here, Nishtha, which is very important, Nishtha. So one example one has to understand, which is an example from Srimad Bhagavat Mahapuran. There is a great person called as Bhakta Prahlad. Now just imagine this Bhakta Prahlad. That Bhakta Prahlad who has gone through n number of difficult phases in life. One who has faced extreme bad situation in life. One who has tortured by every possible most torturous thing in the life. Please pay attention to every statement of mine. During such state of life, did he ever complain to the Lord that, oh my dear Narayana, why is it to me? I am your so great Bhakta and you don't have a compassion for me? Not a single moment this Bhakta Prahlad had a question mark. Not a single moment. There was no question mark. There was such a situation that the orders were given that keep Bhakta Prahlad in the lap of Holika and let it get burned. But even in that situation, his mind was so connected to Lord Narayana that Bhagavan has to completely reverse the boon. The Holika had a boon that one who will sit in her lap will get burnt. But here is one whose Nishtha is 100%. So Bhagavan says, Ananyaschintayanto mam ye jana pariupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. One who has ananya bhakti, one who is now connected to that self which is the self of everyone, that self which is the mightiest power of the whole universe, that self which is the knowledge principle, one who is connected to that principle and abiding in it. So, for such a person, there no matters about any external situation. And Bhagavan gives a promise here to such bhakta, I provide whatever is a requirement and I protect him or her. Now this is called as Atmanishtha. Atmanishtha, where there is no single doubt. And when there is no single doubt, there is no complaint. The faith has turned into a complete nishtha, which is called as permanent connection to the Supreme. Permanent connection to the Supreme. This word we have to jot it down in our mind, in our heart, that permanent connection with the self. You can use the word self, you can use the word Paramatma, you can use the word Bhagavan, whatever you are comfortable with, where there is no question mark about any external situation, and therefore there is no complaint for anything in this world, and that's called as Atma Nishtha. Now, such a person who realizes the self, let us now focus our attention on this beautiful word which is called as Swa Atma Darshanam. Okay, Swa Atma Darshanam. Then we are going to take up the word Atma Nirdvayat. One word. So hope one word is important. One word is important and we are making it more clear what it is. Swa Atma Darshanam, that which is called as the vision of the self, and it is called as self-realization. Now, Bhagavan explains in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna asked the question, what is the question? Sita prajnasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava stitadhi kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. O Bhagavan, who is that person whose prajna? Prajna means the knowledge. That knowledge which is now a wisdom. That knowledge which is not knowledge as an information, but that knowledge has one role to play, which is called as a knowledge principle, which is called as Chit consciousness. Now, how it happened? Please note it. Bhagavan says there, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanne atmana tushta sthita prajnastaduchyate. Whose knowledge becomes his wisdom, that means who abides in the self-knowledge. Please understand. Abiding in the self means abiding in the self-knowledge. Please note it. Abiding in the self is equal to abiding in the self-knowledge. What is self-knowledge in short? Please note it. Self-knowledge in short is you are that Atma Tattva. You are the self, and with your conscious power, this so-called as Upadhi is illumined, because your nature is self-illuminous. You don't require any support to illumine yourself. But when you illumine, you are self-effulgent. So with your Jnana Prakasha, everything gets illumined. So the Upadhi, which is called as BMI. This is called as abidance in the self-knowledge. I am going very slow and to the point. One clarification we are trying to get it. Now, how this person has reached this state where he can abide in the self? Now, this is a very important question. How this person has reached to this state where he is abiding in the self, called as the knowledge of the self? It is because mind, which was occupied by desires, was not ready to get connected to the self. Mind, which was preoccupied by desires, was not ready, was not at all qualified to get connected to the self. With right karma yoga, with right surrender, and with right kripa of Bhagavan and Ashirvad of the Guru, this person gained the knowledge, and with that his all desires are now annihilated. All desires are annihilated, destroyed. Now this mind, which was preoccupied, has no occupation at all, and therefore this mind now is connected to that self-knowledge directly, and connecting to the self-knowledge permanently means Atmani Atmana Tushtaha. Permanent connection of this mind to that self-knowledge, that is called as Atmani Atmana Tushtaha. So this is the Atma Samsthitihi. Swamiji, how is it possible, and what is that nature of the self which can really be so self-illuminous and one can experience that bliss of the self? Now Ramana Maharshi Ji, Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi Ji is explaining us Atma Nirdvayat. Please note this. Atma Nirdvayat, when it is said Advaya, understand this word Advaya. There where is no another. There where there is no another. That is called as Advayaha. That means when there are no two, there cannot be a action possible. Note it. When there are no two, there is no action possible. That means here, how is the self? It is a karta. It is a karta. When the self is a karta, that means it is a bhokta. That means it is a bhokta. So, again to make the point more clear, what is called as self-realization in action? This is a very important point. What is the self-realization in action? Karmani akarmaya pashet. Karmani akarmaya pashet. Akarmani cha karmayah. Akarmani cha karmayah. Sabuddhiman manusheshu sakarma krishna kriti. I am going to explain it. What is that self-realization? Having realized the self, would this person do any action or not? Now, what is this state of self-realization of that wise person who is acting in this world but is not bound by any action? How is it possible? So it is explained, karmani akarmaya pashet. When the action is there, in that action there is no action seen. The action, when it is done with the doership notion, then that is called as action. Real action, which is called as selfish action. When selfish action is there, that means there is some intention of gaining something from the action. What is that gain? Maybe joy, maybe some victory, maybe some material gain. So in that action there is no such trace of any intention to gain anything from this world. Nothing to be gained. And that is the selfless action, where there is no notion of doership. Such state is called as there is no action even though there is a action. So even though there is a action, inaction is seen in action. Now the second part is there is no action, that is akarmani karmaya pashet. Now here the focus is on akarta bhava of that Atma Tattva. How is Atma Tattva? It is akarta. So there is no possibility of any action in the self. Please note, there is no possibility of any action in the self. But because of the presence of this self, which is called as consciousness, all the upadhis, so-called body, mind and intellect, gains the sentiency. Gains the sentiency. That is called as the life force. And that sentiency, one who gains, starts acting. Now just see, here is the Atma Tattva, which is akarta, but in the presence of it there is an action possible. So when from the standpoint of the self there is no action possible, but because of the presence of the self there is action happening. Example, when there is a sunlight all over the universe, the sunlight do not do the action of photosynthesis. There is no involvement as a physical involvement in the action of photosynthesis. What is called as photosynthesis? Photosynthesis means plants, green plant like this plant, which prepares own food, one's own food, with the help of sunlight. So now just imagine the sunlight is there for everyone. It does not have any action in it, but in the presence of the sunlight there is a action which is happening, which is called as photosynthesis. Now understand, from the standpoint of the sun, is there any action? No. So from the standpoint of the self, the Atma Tattva, is there any action possible? No. So in action, when there is no action possible, but presence of it gives this power to the Upadi, so Upadi can act. So one who knows both, Sabuddhiman Manusheshu, that person is Buddhiman. Here Buddhiman means one who is abiding in the self-knowledge. And that's called as the self-realization, that is called as Advaya Sthiti. Now I said in Atma Tattva there is no call as Kriya. Now I am going to explain it. Whenever there is a Kriya, what all things possible with Kriya? Please note it. What are things possible with action? The first, action can create something. Example, if the white board is there, you can paint it and create a beautiful picture. So what you have done? You have created a beautiful painting. How? By your action. So the first point is action can create. Second, action can purify. Action can purify. Like karma yoga. When somebody does a selfless action, it purifies the mind. So, by the action there is a purification possible. Third, by the action you can get what you do not have. By the action you can get what you do not have. Like, it is called as prapya. So that which you do not get, which we do not have. So what? If you do not have a big car, then you do a right action, earn money and get the car. Third, by action you can destroy something. Like, if you take a vaccine of COVID-19, you are going to destroy that sort of fear of pandemic, that sort of fear of the infection of this virus. So you can destroy something by action. Now please pay attention. So that self which is akarta cannot be reached by the action because it cannot be created, it cannot be purified, it cannot be gained by action, and it cannot be destroyed by the action. So therefore action does not reach the self at all. Why? Because the self is untainted by any action. And the example of it is space. The space is untainted by rain when it happens. The space is absolutely unmoved by the bomb blast which happens. The space is absolutely stable even there is a big fire happens anywhere. So understand, no one can destroy the space, no one can create the space, no one can get the space and no one can purify the space. Similarly, that self is Advayaha, which is not connected to any action, which is devoid of any action, because the nature of the self is a karta, is non-doer, and that's called as one who is abiding in this knowledge is Atmanishtata. And that's how the self-realized person remaining in this body enjoys the every moment of this life, because now there is no action which can taint this self. Verse number 27, Bhagavan explains here how is it possible that self which cannot be tainted by anything, Jnana varjita ajnanahina chit, Jnana varjita ajnanahina chit, Jnanamasti kim jnatumantaram, Jnanamasti kim jnatumantaram. Now again, sort of enquiry is given here. How to inquire? Ajnana hina chit, that consciousness which is devoid of thought of ignorance. That consciousness which is devoid of thought of ignorance. Jnana vritti varjitaha. And this consciousness is also devoid of thought of knowledge. The first it is said, devoid of thought of ignorance. The second time it is said, it is also devoid of thought of knowledge. Jnanamasti kim antaram. Is there anything other knowledge than this self as a consciousness? Jnatum, to know the self? No. It is not possible that there is something other knowledge which can know this self. So one point we will take it up. See, the consciousness is a knowledge K capital. What is it called as? K capital. That means it's a knowledge principle. And what you and me in transactional level talk about knowledge as K small, which is called as information. So when you say, do you have a knowledge that the state so called as party president is resigned yesterday evening? Oh, Swamiji, what is it a breaking news? Yes, it is a breaking news. It was rather a breaking news yesterday evening. So this notion, this information is called as knowledge K small. No doubt it's a knowledge because you did not know it and you are going to get it or you are going to know about it. So we are not talking about this information as knowledge. So that information which talks about the world and the worldly things, that is called as all information, which is called as objective knowledge. And here this K capital is the knowledge principle and nothing to do with any of the objective knowledge. Therefore, in this knowledge as a principle, there is no possibility of a thought of ignorance. This is a beautiful point. Example, if sun is there and you ask the question, please note this point. If sun is there, if you ask the question to the sun, oh my dear sun, do you know what is called as darkness? Oh my dear son, do you know what is called as darkness? The son will say, I have never noticed, heard and know what is darkness, because in me there is no possibility of a trace of a darkness. An avatar of a darkness is not possible in the sun. Similarly, in that self, the consciousness, there cannot be a thought of ignorance. Similarly, there cannot be a thought of knowledge. Swamiji, how is it so? Oh my dear, when there is a sun, example, when there is a sun which is shining beautifully, you take your candle light and see, is this light helping you anywhere? Not possible. The moment candle lamp comes in front of a sunlight, it has zero existence. Zero existence at all. Why? The sunlight is so bright, there is no possibility of any illuminary which can illumine anything. Similarly, this knowledge, which is a knowledge principle, there cannot be a thought which is related to the mind possible in this K capital as a knowledge principle. So therefore it is asked, Jnanamasti kim antaram? Is there any other knowledge that is called as consciousness to know this consciousness? No, it is not possible. Why? Now another point will take it up, that if you say there is one consciousness called as A and another consciousness called as B, then if A and B is there and the B is illumining the A, that means the A is limited one. It is conditioned one. So that which is conditioned, that which is limited is called as temporary, and consciousness can never be limited and temporary. Hence, therefore, there is no possibility of any other consciousness which can illumine this consciousness, which can know this consciousness. Therefore, it is now very clear that consciousness is a knowledge principle which knows itself, because it is self-effulgent and a knowledge principle. Because of the presence of the self as a consciousness, everything gets illumined and everything gains this power to know. And therefore, in case of reflected consciousness, please note it. In case of reflected consciousness, what is happening? When the subtle body, which has this power of reflection, which reflects the power of the consciousness, and the moment it is reflected in the subtle body, the subtle body actually, subtle body means mind and intellect. The subtle body is actually inert in nature, and that inert nature of the subtle body does not have this capacity to know itself. But because of the presence of the reflection as a reflected consciousness, it gains this power to know. So it starts knowing everything as an object, but it cannot know the subject because it does not have that subtlety, because it is inert in nature. It is jadam, it is temporary, it is not having that conscious principle as is nature. It is only a reflected consciousness, and that's how it gains that notion I am. Now the first aham which is there is called as ego. And this ego now connects to the body, mind and intellect, and that's how it identifies it as me, myself. And the whole suffering starts because of this ignorance of knowing not self as me. And here, with the right knowledge, this bond, this notion, which is a wrong notion, is destroyed. And therefore, Atma Samsthiti Svatma Darshanam Atma Nirdvayat Atma Nishtata. This person abides in the knowledge forever and disconnected with that not self permanently. That is the self-realization. Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi Ji beautifully explained to all of us the stages to reach to the self-realization as well as the state of self-realization. Now we have completed up till verse number 27. Tomorrow we are going to complete 28, 29 and 30th. That will be the grace of Lord and the blessings of Pujya Gurudev to slowly and steadily could able to complete this text tomorrow. Let us do our contemplation for today. Wherever you are, take up one posture where you remain absolutely stable and there is no movement. Your mind, focus it for 1 minute on your breath. And also, let us not start your volume, let it be on a mute mode. Focus on today's important discussion on the self-realization. It is said, Atma Samsthiti Svatma Darshanam. That sthiti we have seen how a seeker reached here, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parthamanogatan atmanne atmana tushtah sita prajnastaruchyate. He whose mind is completely devoid of any egocentric desire, such mind and intellect, that which is completely pure now, is abiding in the self as a self-knowledge. This state is called as Atmani Atmana Tushtah. The mind is completely and permanently connected to that self. Then we have seen what is Atmanishtha. So we gave an example of Bhakta Prahlad from Srimad Bhagavat Mahapuran, where the mind was so connected to the Lord where there was no single doubt and there was no complaint or there was no incompleteness. Such complete and a permanent connection to the Self, to the Lord, is called as Atmanishtha. Swatma Darshanam is a vision of the Self where there is no notion of doership or enjoyership. How is it possible? Because in the Self there is no action. The nature of the Self is non-doer. Akarta is the nature of the Self. So we have seen by the action, four things are possible. Action can create something. Action can purify something. Action can get something. Action can destroy something. This action cannot reach to the Self because action is always on the transactional level where there are two. All the actions are illumined by the Self, and there is no action possible in the Self. So the realized person, how does he live in life? Karmani akarmayah paschit akarmani cha karmayah. Even though the action is going on, there is no action seen. And even if there is no action, the action is seen in no action. Both the points we have emphasized with different examples. Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi Ji says, Jnana varjita ajnana hina chit. The consciousness is devoid of thought of ignorance as well as a thought of knowledge. How is it so? Because it is a knowledge principle and there is no another knowledge to know it because it is independent of its own. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Experience the silence. Remain there. know it is as the nature of the self. It is not because of any object of the world. It is independent of itself. Let us have a gratitude for Almighty Lord for giving this self-knowledge and these beautiful moments in present. Let us have a gratitude to everyone around us who all are responsible for whatever we are today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Om Namo